thoughts across the pale blue sky. At the edge of the forest, where the meadow met shadow, 12 figures stood in silence. They were travelers sun-browned, road-worn, and quiet in their movements. Some held walking sticks carved from old wood. Others bore bundles slung over their shoulders or strapped to their backs. One woman cradled a child. An old man, with hair like thistledown, knelt and touched the earth. "This is the place," he said. The others said nothing. But one by one, they stepped forward into the shade, into the hush, into the breath of something ancient. The forest was not just a place of trees, it was a being, and it was watching them. For days they had wandered, leaving behind fields that cracked beneath the sun, rivers that had gone to dust. Their old village was no more taken by drought and silence. This place, the Greenwood, was a whisper passed down in stories, said to be deep and alive. It had taken them months to find it, and now they were here. The youngest of them, a boy named Elric, barely 12, stood with his hand on a slender sapling. "It feels warm," he said. The others smiled faintly. The forest was warm, not in temperature, but in presence. It felt like something breathing, not threatening, but aware. They made their first camp that night, not far from the tree line, under a high canopy of larch and oak. They lit no fire. The stars above were pale and steady, and the forest hummed with quiet music. The hoot of owls, the distant howl of a fox, the creak of wood shifting high above. And deep in the night, the forest listened. At dawn, the mist curled low between the trunks of the trees like the breath of something sleeping. The group stirred, slowly rising, not from alarm, but from instinct. There was a peace to the Greenwood, but not idleness. It was a place that encouraged movement, quiet work, and reverence. Edda, the woman who carried the child, was the first to move toward the forest's heart. She stepped lightly, her feet remembering soft soil from her childhood, long before the plains dried. Her son, barely 1 year old, slept against her chest, undisturbed by the whispering leaves. "We should find water," said Joran, a tall man with a calm voice and a scar over one brow. "And a clearing, somewhere to begin." They nodded, in silence, always in silence. They began to explore, not with axes or shovels, but with eyes and ears. They didn't speak to the forest, but they listened. Soon, they found it. A glade where sunlight filtered through the canopy like gold through green glass. A wide stream gurgled nearby, its banks rich with moss. Wild herbs grew freely: thyme, mint, chamomile. Birds watched them from the branches, unafraid. "It's offering," said the old man Krev, the eldest among them. "Not challenge. That matters." They made no sudden decisions. They sat. They waited. They watched. When they finally began to build, they did so not with loud tools or sharp blades, but with gathered things: branches already fallen, stones warmed by sun, leaves that drifted freely. Joran laid the first stone. Edda placed the first woven branch. Even the boy Elric wove vines between sticks, forming the curve of a wall. It wasn't a house yet. It was a beginning, a gesture of peace. And the forest responded. That night, when they returned to their camp, the wind brought with it the scent of wood smoke and wild honey. Mushrooms appeared near their sleeping mat-safe ones, edible, fresh, a gift. The Greenwood had noticed. Haben. Over the next days, their work continued slow, deliberate, respectful. They did not clear trees, but wove their shelters around them, using trunks as supports, roots as natural walls. The forest guided them, though not with words. When a branch cracked, it warned them of poor placement. When a vine drooped, it signaled a need for change. The people learned, and Elric, curious and restless, wandered farther each day. He began speaking to the trees, not expecting answers, just offering stories about his old home, about his mother's lullabies, about a beetle he saw crawling over moss. And sometimes, just sometimes, he thought the trees answered, not with words, but with small things patterns in bark, the shift of light, the fall of a single feather at his feet. On the seventh day, Krev called the group together. "This place has chosen us," he said. "Not all forests welcome people. This one does. But we must offer something more than care. We must offer memory. Let every home we build remember the forest. Let it sing of this place." So they began to build homes not just for shelter, but for belonging. They wove wind into their walls. They shaped doorways that bent like branches. They sang as they worked softly, gently, and the forest held their voices like secrets. The first true home stood beneath an old birch tree whose trunk had split into three, like a trident rising from the soil. Its silver bark gleamed even under clouded skies. The home was more nest than house-curved walls of woven vine, moss-layered roof, and a floor padded with fallen needles and soft clay. It breathed with the forest. It belonged to Edda and her child. When the last branch was placed, and the doorway crowned with carved fern spirals, Edda stood back and whispered, "It is not mine. It belongs here." That night, the wind carried her lullaby not just to her child, but to the entire glade. The trees seemed to lean closer. Small animals crept near. The forest was listening again. 2:08. Elric had found a rhythm in the days. At dawn, he fetched water from the stream. At midday, he helped gather food berries, nuts, edible greens. But his favorite time was the quiet just before dusk, when he was allowed to wander. Always within sight of the glade, always with permission. But even so, he strayed closer to mystery with every step. One evening, following the laughter of a squirrel, Elric discovered a hollow. Not a cave nor a den, but a pocket in the forest floor where roots arched like ribs above a bed of moss. He crawled inside and found carvings, not human too smooth, too ancient. Spirals, leaves, eyes. The hollow hummed softly, not a sound exactly, but a feeling as if he were inside a song, not frightened, not alone. Elric sat there until the stars rose. When he returned to the glade, Krev was waiting. "You saw the heartwood," the old man said, not asking but knowing. Elric nodded. "I think it remembers things." "All forests do," Krev said, "but few allow us to share their memory." That night, the elders gathered and spoke of signs, of old stories fragments, mostly about the greenwood and its secrets, about how, long ago, others may have lived this way, but vanished, or transformed, or merged with the trees themselves. "We won't cut," said Joran. "We won't tear. We won't forget," said Edda. The wind shifted through the glade like a hand brushing silk. Weeks passed. The homes grew not in size, but in life. Vines twined willingly around support beams. Birds nested in the rafters and sang at dawn. Some houses had no dorsally curtains of leaves that parted when approached. Fire pits glowed with stone-circled warmth, fed by branches that fell naturally, never taken by force. Children, there were 3, counting Elric, began naming the trees around them. Grandmother Birch, Laughing Oak, the Listening Pine, and somehow, the trees accepted these names. Leaves would rustle when called. Sap would drip sweetly from chosen trunks. Elric returned often to the hollow. He began leaving little things there, carved stone, a feather, a berry. Each time, something changed. A root would shift. A new symbol would appear in the bark. Once, a small glowing mushroom sprouted overnight and glowed with a soft blue light. He told no one, Not yet. One morning, he awoke with a sentence in his mind, not in a voice he knew, but one that felt like rain or deep sleep. Build what grows, grow what shelters. He didn't know what it meant, but he whispered it to the trees anyway. In the mornings, the glade smelled of warm earth, crushed herbs, and wood smoke. The fire they used for cooking was no ordinary fire. Joran had built the first hearth using flat stones gathered from the stream bed, arranging them in a sunken circle with openings for airflow. Over it, he placed a three-legged frame made of bent hazelwood, strong yet flexible, from which a blackened cooking pot could hang. But the fire itself, the way they made it, was a ritual. They never used dry branches ripped from trees. Instead, they waited for the forest to offer. At dusk, Elric and two other children wandered the edge of the glade to collect fallen twigs, bark, and dry grass. Some nights the forest gave plenty. Other nights, only a few pieces. In those days, they ate cold. Joran taught them to begin the fire not with flint or steel, but with bow drill and breath. He would kneel silently, placing the spindle between his palms, wrapping it with a cord of twisted nettle, and setting it into the notch of a cedar base. Slowly, steadily, he would pull back and forth. The spindle turned, smoke rose, and finally, a tiny coal was born, placed gently into a nest of moss and dry leaves, then blown to life with a whisper. Fire is a living thing, he said. You don't command it, you invite it. They called the fire hearthlight. It was always kept small, never left alone, and never greedy. If the wind picked up, they let it die. If the night was warm, they let it sleep. But when it burned, it gave off a golden warmth that made the glade feel like the center of the world. End. Food was never wasted. It was gathered, traded with the forest, and always shared. They ate what grew freely: nuts from the hazel trees, berries from the bramble patches, fiddlehead ferns in spring, and wild onions that grew in soft clusters near the stream. The children learned to identify edible mushrooms by smell and color. Edda taught them a song, a rhyme about spots and stems and hidden signs of poison. The cooking was slow, careful, almost sacred. A stew might take half the day, simmering gently over hearthlight, flavored with mint and root vegetables. Thick flatbreads were baked on heated stones, dough made from crushed chestnuts and wild grains, soaked and ground by hand with two round rocks. Sometimes, if the forest allowed, they found fish in the stream trout mostly, sleek and silver, but they never took more than two. Before fishing, Krev would kneel and touch the water, whispering thanks. If the stream shimmered with blue light, they knew it was safe to fish. If the water remained dark and still, they turned away hungry. Not all hunger is to be filled, Krev once said. Some is there to teach us patience. End. They preserved food with smoke and leaf wraps. Joran built a drying frame of thin willow branches, suspending thin slices of mushrooms and herbs above a smokeless fire. Meat, rarely had and never in excess, was smoked using bark curls and slow-burning green wood. Herbs were tied in bunches and hung from branches inside homes, filling the air with the scent of sage and thyme. Even storage was thoughtful. They dug cool pits, lined with smooth stones and moss, then covered with bark slabs to keep out rain and animals. Nothing was hoarded. Everything was counted and rotated. The rule was simple: eat what needs eating first. Edda began keeping a book not of paper, but of bark pages sewn with vine thread. Each page was etched with charcoal and berry ink. She recorded what they gathered, when it ripened, what healed, and what harmed. She called it the forest's table. When the moon rose full, they shared a feast, no hunting, no gathering that day, just cooking and storytelling. Bread, stew, tea brewed from pine needles and rose hips. They sat around the hearthlight, passing bowls and songs. Children danced, elders told stories. The trees, it seemed, leaned in to listen. One night, Elric asked, "Do the trees eat?" Krev smiled. "Yes, not as we do, but they drink sun. They breathe air. They feast on stillness." Elric nodded thoughtfully. "Then they must like our fire. It's warm, but it doesn't hurt." "Exactly," Krev said. And. And so their lives grew around food and fire. Not just for survival, but for rhythm, for connection. Every act of eating, of cooking, of sharing was a thread tying them to the greenwood. And the forest, in its quiet way, accepted them. But deep beyond the glade, past streams and mossy stones, something else was stirring an ancient hunger, older than fire, older than homes. It had watched these new people build, eat, sing, and it began to wonder if it should also speak. The mornings grew quieter, not in sound, but in feeling. The usual songbirds still sang, and the stream still chattered over stone. But beneath the familiar sounds was something else, something hollow, like the echo of a voice too soft to catch. It was Elric who noticed it first. He had gone walking as always after gathering water, his steps light, his eyes wide. But the places he knew, the twisted alder, the stump shaped like a chair, felt somehow different, not wrong, just watchful. The leaves no longer swayed with every breeze. Some branches remained still, even as wind kissed the rest of the canopy. Insects moved in strange spirals. A mossy rock he'd passed every day now bore a crack, thin and deep, shaped like a tear. When he returned to the glade, he found Joran sharpening a flint blade. "Does the forest feel listening?" Elric asked. Joran looked up. "It always listens. That's not new." "No," Elric said. "This is different. It's not just listening, it's thinking." That night, the air turned cooler, not with the bite of weather, but with silence. A deep hush fell over the trees, and even hearthlight burned lower than usual, despite fresh wood. The group ate quietly, glancing toward the trees more often than usual. Even the fire's crackle seemed cautious. And the next day, Edda led a small group to gather berries. She returned early, face pale. "The black bark thicket is gone," she said. "Rotted. Overnight. Everything collapsed inward." Krev frowned deeply. That thicket was centuries old. They took it as a warning, not a threat. The next morning, Krev and Elric walked deeper into the forest to listen. They followed a trail not marked by foot, but by feeling. Places where the light dimmed oddly, where the trees leaned ever so slightly inward, as if listening to one another. It was there, after the third bend, that they found it. A path, not made by people nor animals, just forest ground where nothing grew, not even moss. A line of bare soil weaving gently between the trunks, narrow and straight. As if something had walked there and, whatever it was, the forest had stepped aside to let it pass. Elric knelt and touched the earth. It was cool. Too cool. "There's no root here," he said. "No worms, no bugs. Nothing lives in this line." Krev bent down beside him. "Then something has walked here that silences life." They didn't follow the path. Not that day. Instead, they placed a stone at its edge, a warning marker. A way to say, "We've seen, we remember, we step carefully." When they returned, Joran listened to the tale without interruption. Then he stood, turned to the forest, and whispered, "We do not challenge you. We only wish to stay." The leaves rustled in response. Not angrily, not warmly either. Just acknowledgement. And that night, Krev added a page to Edda's forest book, a path that bears no life, a path that sings silence. Respect it. Do not walk it. It is older than our fire. Elric didn't sleep that night. He sat outside his family's shelter, the moss roof glistening with dew, watching the trees. And once, just once, he saw something move between the trunks. Not an animal, not a person, a shadow with a rhythm like breath. And then it was gone. 3 nights after Elric saw the shadow, the dreams began. They came not just to him, but to many in the glade. Edda dreamed of roots curling through her hands like threads of hair. Joran dreamed of doorways opening in tree trunks, leading to blackness that hummed. Krev saw a flame burning beneath the earth, steady and waiting. But Elric's dream was different. He stood in the forest, in the heart of that lifeless path, and the trees had no leaves. The sky was white, not cloudy. Just blackened from beneath the soil came a sound like breathing, slow, ancient, patient. Then, rising from the path, came a figure made of bark and shadow. No eyes, no face, just an outline that shifted like smoke in water. It didn't speak, it didn't move, but Elric felt it waiting, not for him, for something deeper, something older than people. He woke before dawn, heart steady but cold. They met in a circle that morning, around hearthlight. Edda spoke first. "We are part of the forest, but something older than the forest has woken." Joran nodded slowly. "And it hasn't decided if we belong." "What is it?" asked one of the younger women. Krev answered with a sigh. "Some say the oldest forests carry memories of before language, before people, before animals, before time even. Those memories don't think as we do. They feel, they remember, and sometimes they notice." "So what do we do?" Elric asked. "We show we're not a threat, that we build but do not take, that we listen, that we can forget ourselves when needed." And over the following days, the glade changed its rhythm. No trees were touched. No vines were gathered. Even meals were made from storage only. They gave the greenwood space, silence, a gesture of respect. At night, they lit only the smallest fire, barely more than a glow. And slowly, something shifted. The breeze returned. The birds sang louder. And the path, the lifeless trail, began to grow moss. Just a line, thin and pale, but it was life. The people took this as a sign. The forest was not rejecting them. It was testing them. Then one morning, at the very edge of the glade, a single sprout rose from the cracked stone they used as a gathering place, a plant none of them had ever seen. Its stem was translucent green, its leaves shaped like stars. Elric approached it, knelt, and felt warmth radiate from it, not heat, but presence. "It's a gift," he whispered. "No," said Krev beside him. "It's a message. We are being trusted." That evening, they held a quiet celebration, not loud, not festive. A shared meal, gentle music made from reeds and string, and the telling of stories, not legends, but memories. Each person shared something of their past there: old village, a childhood scent, the name of a lost grandparent. "We must give memory," said Krev, "because that's what this forest keeps." That night, Elric dreamed again, but this time, the path was full of flowers, and the figure of bark and shadow stood still, not in warning, but in welcome. It began with the trees humming, not in a way you could hear with ears, not exactly. It was a vibration in the chest, a pulse beneath the skin, like standing near a waterfall you couldn't see. It came at dusk, when the sky turned violet and the birds went still. Elric felt it first. Sitting on the roots of a tall maple, he placed his hand against the trunk, and for a moment it was as if the tree exhaled. The bark grew warm. The hum deepened. He closed his eyes and heard it, not a sound, but a voice made of feeling. "Come." He stood. He did not tell anyone where he was going. He couldn't. The word he'd heard wasn't a command or invitation. It was a pull as if something forgotten was calling him home. The trees parted for him gently. Vines unwound, branches arched aside, moss thickened beneath his feet. He walked until the glade was gone, and all around him stood trees so old their bark was silver and cracked like dried riverbeds. Then he saw it. A circle of trees, 12 of them, each different: pine, oak, beech, elm, cedar, birch, ash, alder, yew, willow, holly, hawthorn. Their branches twisted inward, weaving above to form a dome. In the center, the soil was black and soft. And in that soil grew a single tree, no taller than Elric, with bark like moonlight, leaves like glass. He stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the circle, the trees spoke. Not aloud, not even in words. They filled his mind with memory not his own. But the forests, he saw visions. Fire sweeping across a green world before people walked. Creatures with too many eyes singing to the moon. A child planting a seed while the stars wept. A woman with moss in her hair whispering to a bear. The forest watching, learning, waiting. He fell to his knees, trembling, not afraid but overwhelmed. The tree in the center shimmered. One of its leaves drifted down and landed in his palm. And when it touched his skin, it dissolved into light. The moment passed. The dome of branches darkened. The path behind him reappeared. The grove, as he would later call it, fell silent. But something had changed. Elric was not the same. Hadri. He returned to the glade at dawn, pale and quiet. Krev saw him and said nothing, just nodded. "You heard it," he said later. "Didn't you?" Elric only whispered, "The forest dreams." Var. Over the next days, strange things happened. Birds began to mimic voices, not just random sounds, but words, children's names, snippets of songs. Moss spread in perfect spirals across the ground near their homes. The stream changed its sound, sometimes babbling in rhythms that matched their heartbeats. Edda found her child laughing at nothing, and when she looked closer, saw footprints in the soft earth beside him, small, barefoot, vanishing quickly. And always beneath it all was the hum. One night, the community gathered again, this time in reverent silence. Elric stepped forward, holding a twig from the strange grove. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but every creature in the trees seemed to pause and listen. "There's more than forest here," he said. "There's memory, there's spirit, and it has chosen to trust us." He looked to Krev. "But it also wants something." Krev nodded gravely. "What?" "To be remembered." Elric placed the twig in the center of the fire circle, and it did not burn. Instead, it glowed silver and green, casting shadows shaped like animals, like trees, like faces they did not know. Everyone watched in silence. And far, far in the forest, something old and vast stirred again. Not in anger, not in warning, but in recognition. The ones who watch. After the night of the glowing twig, everything in the glade grew quieter but not empty. It was a silence full of listening, the kind of silence you hear before thunder, the kind that waits. Then the markings began to appear. On bark, on stones, in the dirt. Not carved, not painted, grown. Delicate spirals, branching lines, eye-like patterns, crescent moons made of moss. At first they appeared near Elric's shelter, then near the hearthlight, then on the sleeping mats of the elders, each one different, each one placed as if someone or something was leaving messages. Krev called them glyphs, forest writing, he said, not made by hand, made by memory. Elric traced one of the spirals and felt warmth pulse through his fingertips, as if the forest recognized him. That same week, strange figures began to appear near the edge of sight. Children saw them first. Tall, slim shapes like people, but not quite. They moved like fog. Their limbs were long, their heads tilted as though listening to things no one else could hear. Their skin, if it could be called, that was like bark woven with light, not glowing but reflecting the life around them. No one spoke to them. No one needed to. They stood at the edge of the glade, silent, watching. They came at dusk. They left before midnight. They never approached, never entered the fire's glow. "They're the forest's memory," Krev said one night. "Not ghosts, not gods, just what remains when time forgets." Elric, bold as ever, tried to approach. He walked slowly, barefoot, hands open. The figure did not move. But as he drew close, a gust of wind swept through the gradient. In that moment, he heard hundreds of voices, not speaking, but remembering. Laughter, sorrow, cries of birth and death, all woven into the breeze. And then the figure was gone. Elric dropped to his knees and wept not from fear, but from knowing. In that moment, he understood. The greenwood wasn't just alive. It was ancient, and it was watching to see if humans could be trusted with its heart. Soon, the people began to change, not in shape, but in sense. They no longer needed torches at night. The moonlight was enough. They could hear footsteps in moss from 30 paces. They could smell storms before clouds arrived. The youngest child, barely 2, began humming melodies no one had taught her. Melodies the birds echoed the next morning. And when Edda stirred her herbal tea one morning, the water swirled into a spiral, just like the glyphs. She smiled but said nothing. The forest was teaching them, and they were learning. One evening, Elric returned to the Whisper Grove and found something new. A figure sat at the base of the silver-leaved tree. Not shadow, not bark. A woman. Her hair flowed like willow branches. Her skin dappled with the texture of stone and leaf. Her eyes were closed, her hands resting on her knees. She breathed not with lungs, but with the rhythm of wind through leaves. Elric said nothing. He sat across from her in silence. The grove hummed. After a long time, the woman opened her eyes. Not human, not animal, just light within depth. And in a voice softer than moss, she said, "You are the first to stay." Then she reached out and touched his forehead. Elric's vision went white-hand. He saw a world before humans. Spirits dancing as wind through branches. Fire brought not by tool, but by song. Homes shaped from trees that gave, not took. A promise made long ago. We will remember you, if you remember us. Then she was gone. The grove was quiet again, but Elric carried the memory with him. And as he walked back toward the glade, he knew there were no longer guests here. They were becoming part of the greenwood. The footsteps that did not ask. They heard them before they saw them. Boots, heavy, mismatched, cracking twigs, brushing through brambles without pause, voice loud, sharp, impatient. It was Elric who froze mid-step, a basket of herbs in his hand, and turned toward the southern ridge. The air shifted. The birds stopped singing. Even the stream's babble dimmed. He dropped the basket and ran. By the time he reached the glade, others had already gathered. Krev stood with his staff in hand, eyes narrowed toward the ridge. "They've come," he said simply. "Who?" asked Edda, holding her son close. Krev looked to the forest. "The ones who do not listen." There were 6 of them, dressed in stitched hides, carrying axes and long knives, their clothes stained with ash and sap. Their leader, a thick-shouldered man with yellow eyes, stepped into the outer edge of the glade without hesitation. He did not see the glyphs beneath his boots. He did not pause before the trees. "This land's quiet," he said aloud, as if to the air. "Good timber, good hunting." He whistled. Two others laughed and spread out. Elric stood between the trees, hidden in shadow, heart pounding. The forest around him felt tight, clenched, as if holding its breath. A squirrel chirped onsharp, a larmidand then fell silent. The newcomers did not notice. They broke branches. They stepped on mushrooms. One struck a tree with the butt of his axe, just to hear the sound. Jorn stepped out then, tall and calm. "This place is not empty," he said. The yellow-eyed man turned. "Didn't ask if it was. It's open. It's alive," Jorn replied. "Then it'll die quiet." Behind the man, a woman drew a flint knife and carved a mark into a birch trunk. The tree shuddered. Elric felt it, even from where he stood, like pain, like warning. The glade darkened not with clouds, but with presence. End of team. That night, the people of the glade met around hearthlight, silent. "They've begun a fire," said one of the younger boys who had crept to the edge of the intruders' camp. "Big, too big. They cut 2 trees already. One was living." The forest did not sing that night. No wind, no owl. Even the stream flowed heavy, like it didn't want to be heard. "They don't see the signs," said Edda. "They don't ask. They just take." "They are what we used to be," Krev said quietly, "before we remembered." Elric clenched his fists. "We can't let them stay." Joran nodded. "But we can't fight them. Not with steel, not with fire. That's their way." "Then how?" someone asked. And Krev looked toward the forest and whispered, "We ask the trees." End of team. At midnight, Elric returned to the Whisper Grove. The central tree still shimmered. The dome above it pulsed faintly, like breath in sleep. He knelt before the trunk and placed both palms flat on the soil. "Something is wrong," he whispered. "They are cutting what breathes. They don't hear you." The ground beneath him vibrated. Roots shifted. A voice spoken, but felt entered his chest like warm wind. Memory defends itself. Then a figure stepped from between the trees, not the woman from before, but something older, taller. Its form was made of hundreds of twigs, woven like armor, eyes glowing faintly like fireflies trapped in honey. Elric did not move. The figure knelt before him. "Will you carry the forest warning?" Elric swallowed. "Yes." The figure raised a hand and touched his chest. At once, Elric saw visions again. A flood swallowing a clearing where trees had once sung. Fires lit by human hands, ignored cries of the grove. Spirits retreating, hiding, weeping in bark. A voice that once welcomed, now warning. When he awoke, he was alone in the grove. But etched into the soil beside him were 6 glyphs bright, glowing, pulsing with power. They were not words. They were warnings. And he knew what had to be done. The gate of listening wood. At dawn, the glade was silent, but not afraid. The people had gathered beneath the grandmother birch, the tallest tree near their homes, its branches like arms that had held generations of birds. Elric stood at the center, the glyphs from the grove burning softly in his hands. They pulsed like breath. "We cannot stop them with blades," he said, "but we can show them that this place remembers." Krev stepped forward with his staff. "We will raise a boundary, not a wall of fear, but a gate of memory, one that does not block, but asks." Edda looked to the forest. "Will the trees help us?" As if in answer, the wind rose gently, and leaves spiraled down in perfect circles. They began to work, not with axes, not with saws, but with invitation. End of team. First came the shape. They found a clearing just beyond the southern edge of the glade, the point where the intruders had first entered. It was a space where 3 trees had grown in an arc, their trunks naturally curved, like shoulders leaning inward. Elric stood between them and pressed one palm to each. He whispered the names he had learned in the grove. The trees responded, branches creaked, roots shifted, and bark split slightly, revealing soft green wood beneath. From there, the others gathered vines, willing ones, that hung low and let go with ease, and began to weave them into the space between the trunks. Edda sang as she worked, a low melody of river and rain. Moss crept up their fingers. The vines shaped themselves. It was not a wall. It was a gate, tall, arched, alive. The wood within the arch twisted into spirals and eyes, forming a pattern like the glyphs. When the wind passed through it, it whispered not in any language, but in warning and welcome at once. This place listens. This place remembers. Enter only in peace. Ensor. Next came the offerings. Each family brought something from their shelter, something meaningful. A carved bone whistle, a bundle of dried mint, a child's stone pendant. They hung them carefully along the gate, not as ornaments, but as stories, memories made visible. The gate began to shimmer faintly, not with light, but with presence. Animals came, too. A fox curled beside one post. A thrush nested in the top curve of the arch. Even a shy forest stag appeared at dusk, standing motionless beneath the gate before bowing its antlered head and vanishing. The spirits see it, Krev said. Now let the humans see it too. Ensor. On the third night, Elric returned to the Whisper Grove with 2 others, Joran and Edda. They knelt together beneath the moon. We ask for protection, Elric said. Not to harm, only to hold. The forest listened and answered. Roots burst slowly from the earth near the gate, rising like fingers, wrapping around the lower vines to strengthen the structure. The bark on the trees thickened, hardening to stone-like plates. Overhead, new branches arched down, forming a canopy. And in the very center of the gate, where the glyphs had been woven, a new symbol appeared, glowing faint green. A circle within a leaf. Life. Protected. Ensor. By morning, the gate stood complete. It did not bar the way. It did not command. It invited understanding. And anyone who passed through would feel the weight of centuries, the eyes of trees, the hush of root sand would be changed, or turned away. The first crossing. They came at noon as the sunlight pierced straight down through the high canopy, casting long shadows from every tree. The sound of boots again, laughter rough and careless, metal clinking, a smell of smoke thick and oily. The people of the glade stood behind the trees, hidden but calm. The gate stood alone, tall and quiet, its woven shape humming softly in the breeze. Then the strangers arrived. They stopped. Even from a distance, Elric saw the change in their posture. They had expected open ground, weakness. But what they found was the gate. The yellow-eyed leader stepped closer, eyes narrowed. "What is this?" he muttered. "Some kind of scarecrow nonsense?" He reached out a hand to touch the vines. The moment his fingers grazed the bark, a chime rang through the air. Not a loud sound, barely, a whisper, but it pierced deep, as if it rang not in the ears, but in the bones. He jerked back. The others exchanged glances. "Just old wood," one said. "Move it." But none moved. The leader scowled and stepped forward, pushing his way between the woven vines. And the gate responded. Not violently, Not cruelly. The arch closed, vines thickened, roots wrapped upward, branches twisted like fingers curling inward, and the space around him turned still. Even the air stopped moving. He drew his knife, but it felt heavy, as if it no longer wanted to be a weapon. He tried to shout, but no sound came. From the trees, Elric stepped forward, calm, open palms. "You were warned," he said softly. Behind him, the rest of the villagers emerged, not with weapons, with presence. One by one they stood, eyes bright, voices low. They began to hum not a song, but the same frequency they had heard in the grove, a vibration of memory, of life, of sorrow and hope. The gate pulsed with light, and the stranger inside it began to tremble. Then, slowly, the vines opened. He staggered out, pale, eyes unfocused. His knife dropped from his hand. He fell to his knees, breathing hard. Behind him, the gate stood open again, unchanged. The other 5 strangers looked at each other. None dared follow. "What did you see?" one asked the leader. He looked up slowly. "A forest with a face," he whispered, "and it saw everything I've ever done." None of them spoke again. They turned, and they left. That night, the people of the glade gathered once more. They sat beneath the stars, beside the gate that now truly lived. Its light had faded, but its shape remained strong-woven from memory and mercy. "We did not fight," Krev said. "We remembered," Elric added, "and the forest remembered us." The fire crackled gently. The trees swayed. And from deep within the greenwood, the spirits watched and were satisfied. The days after the gate stood were quiet, not tense, but peaceful. No strangers returned. No more symbols appeared. The greenwood seemed to breathe easier, and with it, so did the people. That morning, Joran stood in the center of the glade with a sharpened stick and began to draw lines in the dirt. "We've lived as guests," he said. "Now let's live as builders." Around him, the others gathered: Edda, Krev, Elric, and more. Children sat cross-legged, watching. For the first time, there was talk of permanence. "3 homes here," Joran said, pointing to a cluster of stones. "A larger one here for food, tools, work, and a path no wider than 3 steps winding to the stream." They began building the next morning, but they did not build like their ancestors had: cutting, clearing, flattening. They built with the land. The first true structure was a gathering hall. They found a ring of trees that naturally curved inward, forming half a circle. Instead of felling them, they extended the curve, placing hand-cut planks of fallen wood between trunks, lashing them with vine rope and flexible willow strips. The roof was made from bark shingles, layered over a woven frame. Edda designed small open slits in the roof to let in rain for collection. Elric carved narrow skylights between branches. It was cool, shaded, and smelled of cedar and fresh leaves. Inside, they placed a long bench made from a tree split in a storm. No nails, only pegs, wedges, and care. By week's end, it stood firm. They called it the Long Room, Labor Vox. Then came the paths. Not roads, no stone, just soft ground, pressed by feet and framed with moss. Children lined them with pine cones and smooth river rocks. At dusk, they lit lanterns made from carved gourds and oiled leaves. There were no straight-line every path curved around trees and stumps, respecting the terrain, and each one was named Fern Walk, Shadow Bend, Water Trail. Maps were drawn, not with rulers or grids, but with stories. Elric's map of the village looked more like a painting than a chart, trees marked with personalities, homes drawn with swirls and loops, paths labeled with colors instead of names. "That's not a map," Joran said with a grin. Elric smiled. "It's ours." Lebrevak. Houses followed quickly. Some were lifted onto thick roots, perched like nests. Others were dug halfway into gentle hillsides, insulated by earth and bark. All were round or oval soft shapes, easy to heat and cool. Clay from the river was mixed with straw and moss for insulation. They used hollowed logs for chimneys, bark for shutters, flat stone for floors. Every home had a fire circle. Every fire was earned not taken, not forgotten. By the end of the season, they had 12 homes. The long room, a small shelter for tools, and the gate still standing silently at the edge of the south. And in the center of the village, a space left open not for buildings, but for gathering, for music, for sitting, for silence. No walls, no fences, only intention. Seasons passed. The greenwood changed with themits, leaves golden and red, then bare and silvered with frost, then young and green again, and through it all, the village stood, not as something placed on the forest, but in it, like a root, like a branch. Children grew. Some had never known another home. For them, the forest was not strange or mysterious. It was normal. They knew where to find warm rocks after rain, which vines made the best rope, how to walk barefoot without snapping a twig. Elders taught skills, not from books, but from doing. Barcraft, smoke drying, rain catching, planting in shadows, digging quiet root cellars, fixing roofs with moss and thyme. There were tools made of bone and obsidian, but also inventions. A grain grinder powered by a falling stream, a clay kiln heated with sun-focusing mirrors of polished metal. Trade began, slowly. Other people found them curious, cautious, respectful. Some came for herbs, others brought dried fish, baskets, or wool. The gate still stood. If someone entered with open hands and quiet feet, they were welcome. If not, they never found the village at all. Elric became a builder, like Joran. He carved beams and designed homes with walls that caught the wind just right. Edda's son, now 10, ran the village's tiny libraria ring of shelves carved into a tree trunk, filled with bark books, leaf-ink journals, and memory maps. And the gate, always the gate, remained. It no longer glowed. It didn't need to. Its presence was known, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. You didn't have to see it to know it was there. On the 13th year of the village, they held a gathering under the long room's roof. Everyone came, old and young, traders and friends, even distant wanderers who had only heard stories. They shared food. They played music. And when silence fell, Krev, now slower, but still wiser, stood and raised a hand. "We came here as seekers," he said, "then as guests, then as builders. But today we are something else, not masters, not rulers, just part of it all, like leaves, like stones, like roots." He looked around, eyes bright. "And as long as we remember what this place has given its calm, its rhythm, its space to begin again, it will never truly be silent." Outside, the forest stirred, not magically, not mysteriously, just alive. And the village remained, steady beneath the trees, breathing with them, changing with them, and growing still.